Hi, I'm Will and I'm 12 years old. I like rugby and cricket and I love acting. It's my passion. Another thing about me is that I have a neurological condition called Tourette syndrome. Dr. Jeremy Stern will now briefly explain what that is.
Everybody with Tourette syndrome actually has it slightly differently. The main feature of Tourette syndrome are what we call tics, which are involuntary movements or noises. And the most famous kind of tic, which is involuntary swearing, which is what people think about when Tourette syndrome is mentioned often, is actually quite uncommon. It's only in about 10% of people with Tourette syndrome, although it's pretty unpleasant for the people that do have it. They don't mean to swear, these words just slip out when they don't want them to. But people who have Tourette syndrome also very often have other less visible features than the tics. So they can have obsessionality, which we call OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder, and they can very commonly have concentration problems, which is called ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
My experience is that I can jump, shout and sometimes hurt myself. This makes me very embarrassed and angry, and sometimes very frustrated. I'm interested in other people's lives and how they experience Tourette's. I want to know what the future might hold for me. First, I'm going to speak to Connor and Kelsey. They're brother and sister who both have TS. Hi guys, you have an interesting story to share because you're brother and sister and you're really close in age. So what's TS like for you compared to each other and your experiences?
Well, I had quite a positive experience with my Tourette's. When I first told my friends, it was quite good because I was a bit worried that they might, turn around and go, "What's that?" So I first gathered all my friends up. When I first told them, they were a bit like, "But I don't see you swearing in class. Aren't you all just going to start blurting out swear words and random things?" So I had to explain to them that that's only the very severe cases that you have the swearing, coprolalia, and I have very mild, so all I do is flip my fingers and eyes and nose and sometimes hit my shoulder and my head.
I'm the total opposite to Connor. I've had quite a negative experience with my Tourette's. I first, at primary school, was when I found out when I was about 10, and that was when I was fully diagnosed. I went to school and, like Connor, gathered my friends and explained things to them. But unfortunately, one girl told me, "Oh, I've had that, but now I've got rid of it." And I had to explain to her that it's not something it can ease over time, but you can never fully get rid of it. And she went, "Of course you can, I've had Tourette's." And that kind of made me think, well, if you're going to lie to me, then obviously you're not the kind of people I need to be hanging around with, you're not going to accept me.
So, can you tell me a bit about yourself and what life has been like for you?
I'm 18 years old. From the age of 10 to 16, I suffered from Tourette's. I was diagnosed at the age of 10, discharged from Great Ormond Street in the end at the age of 16. Obviously looking at me now, 18, it's just a massive part of my life. So at the age of 10, just on the way home from France, been on a family holiday, and just started making noises. I can demonstrate like just used to make uncontrollable noises. Obviously my parents, grandparents, all of us didn't know what was going on. I had to go to Brentwood in Essex, so I live in Rochester, so it took quite a while to get there, but eventually I got diagnosed with Tourette's, which obviously was new because I was completely unaware of it, my family are unaware of it. All my friends, I had to tell them that had Tourette's syndrome, what it was. Basically I thought to myself at the age of 10, what on earth am I going to be doing, like how's this going to affect my life really? And that's what you're always doing, you're always thinking about the future, like what's gonna happen? Can I drive, can you, just even simple things like getting a girlfriend, meeting new people, socialising with people, it's all very difficult when you're making noises even, or like even things out when you're looking at the sky and things like that. But I just guess you have to get on with things, and it's just things like that really.
What are your experiences and how do you see life going forward?
I think I've had tics as far as I can remember, ever since I was about age 6, and I was seen by several doctors saying that I had tic disorder. But it was not until I was in pediatric training that a visiting consultant saw me at work and mentioned to one of my colleagues, "Oh, he's got Tourette syndrome." I mean, it was difficult when I was seeing patients because sometimes some parents would refuse me to see or manage their children because of my motor tics. And that was, I mean, I felt very embarrassed and bad about it. I've encountered difficulties in my profession, like for example when I was applying for a training post because I initially wanted to become an obstetrician and gynecologist. So I passed the interviews. I remember going for this post. I passed the interview, the exam, went for the interview, and I was very, very hopeful. But I didn't get it, and I learned later on from a colleague that it could have been my tic disorder, my Tourette's, that would have caused it. That's why I decided to do pediatrics, which I think it's been good. It's been very positive. Yes, I think having Tourette's made me more understanding of other people's difficulties, whether it's physical or emotional, psychological difficulties. It made me more empathetic. Okay, because I myself have those difficulties, and with the patients I see, some parents have commented, like saying they feel hopeful when they see me because of what I've achieved, despite the difficulties I've had in my life.
I know a huge issue for you has been your career. Despite all your skills and your efforts, it's not been easy. What do you think has been the main problem?
The walk from the door to my station was purgatory every morning. I like the freedom to be able to move around. I can't sit still for too long in front of a workstation. I have to get up and move around, and by moving around you actually upset and distract your colleagues. As well as the fact that when I have to tick, it's very obvious in an open plan environment, and I was very conscious and turning around and looking around and seeing groups of people, 1, 2, 3, watching me and being the office entertainment. And I knew at that point in my career that working in that open office environment meant the end of that role. And when voluntary redundancy came along, I accepted it. But the bane of my life would be meetings, we've all been in them, those meetings where it's really without objective, it's a meeting for meeting's sake, or it doesn't really achieve anything, and you're sitting there for an hour, and sitting still in a room with 12 people around a table, I would begin to mimic their mannerisms and mimic their accent, and I would say things out of turn compulsively.
Being the oldest of everyone I've interviewed, I think it's right that you should have the last word. How have you coped, and how do you see your TS now?
I reflect on the fact that for 40 plus years I've, I suppose, had quite a variable experience. First remember becoming aware of, in my case, phonic tics initially when I was about 10, being diagnosed at about 14 or 15, but having no recollection now of whether I was made aware of that diagnosis, because you bear in mind that in the 60s, the late 60s, so little was known generally, even amongst the medical profession. I think there might well have been a sort of protective approach in terms of not sharing the diagnosis with me. It's now received wisdom that it's a positive experience to know that there is a name for it and a formal diagnosis. I've actually no recollection of when I first heard the term Tourette syndrome, interestingly. It can be quite annoying and also quite isolating if people who are trying to help, and I'm thinking particularly of myself at the age of some of the people down the corridor, try to talk it up and encourage you to sort of put a brave face on it to an extent that makes you wonder if you're the only one who can see the problem. And that's a terribly difficult balance to strike. I think people in a situation, whether it's Tourette's or any other illness or any other trauma or challenge in life, want sort of constructive sympathy, but that is right not to pity and overindulge them. And that's a hugely difficult balance to strike, and that's it's easy for me to look back to my teens or my 20s and think that people, whether it's family or friends or clinicians, didn't strike it. I think very, very likely it wasn't a bad stab at striking that balance. And I know it's hugely difficult. My sort of thought about what I've been saying is that I want to send a positive message about what can be the sort of stable and contented life you can reach without in any way failing to understand the huge emotional challenge that it brings.
First of all, I'd like to say thanks for everyone for coming and doing this today. I've learned so much that everyone with TS has their own different story, and they're so diverse, but the one thing they have in common is that TS is challenging, and it's challenging for everyone, but going forward I can feel confident that I can go away today and live my life how I want to. Thank you.